So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting of BUHS number 6 to order at 6:32 for today, January 8th, 2018. And the first part of our meeting was scheduled to have an information session related to the budget. And I'm assuming that's why a lot of people are here tonight, which is, like as I said before, great to see people here. I think what we're going to start with, though, with the budget, a couple things. For those people that want to speak, just because this is getting recorded for BCTV, if you speak, please stand up, say your name and where you're from, so what time you're from, so that BCTV can have that recorded. Also, our clerk can have that recorded as well. Also, I think that before we start diving too much into the budget discussion, I'd like to have Frank Rucker, the business manager, just explain to everybody, including some board members. When we left our last meeting in December, we left this room with a bunch of assumptions based on the state funding formula and where things stood. Since the holidays, those assumptions have been changed. But the information has been changed because it's no longer assumptions, we have facts, and it's dramatically different than we were expecting. So I'm going to turn it over first to Frank to kind of explain the assumptions and how it's different, and then we'll go into specifics with Bob and the finance committee. Thanks, Frank.
Can we get copies of the budget, accurate, updated copies of the budget to look at?
So we have a summary document for the board. We don't have copies of the detailed document, but we certainly can make them available. And we are going to cover the specifics of the budget. So if you have any questions about that, we can address them. Okay, so to give some context, as Ricky is asking for, so we had assumptions shared with the board on December 4th, and then again on December 18th, where we felt the proposed budget of $25,375,000 was a reasonable plan, which is just approximately 0.1% change from the prior year. So that was also within the timeline where the school funding formula requires the Agency of Education to provide us with equalized enrollment data as of December 15th. So we thought we had a pretty good baseline for the basis of our assumptions, which, as you know, are primarily associated with student needs and our enrollment. So the reason why we've had such an unusual and, I would say, difficult planning schedule from December 18th till now is because the day after our meeting here on December 18th, we received revised Agency of Education equalized student data. And for the board, you know that is the basis for calculating the tax rate. So we knew that we would see somewhat of an adjustment in equalized student data because the State Board of Education accepted the Town of Vernon's request to withdraw. That request initially was up until July of 2019. The state advanced the implementation of that till July of 2018. So the revision in data essentially took us, if you have the handout that I've provided you, and it's one that you've seen before in terms of the history, but page 3 is the tax estimate. It's a document that's developed by the Agency of Ed, and we're required to include it in our annual report. On page 3, the new data is on line 12. It's equalized student going from 1,156 students for the current period that we are operating under to 960 students. down 17%. So the way the funding formula works is if we don't have a correlation between spending and student population, it's a direct effect on the tax rate, the school property tax rate. And as I say, we anticipated that there would be a drop associated with the Vernon students who are now counted at the Vernon School District. But that would be about 120 or 130 students. Of course, students make that decision in every summer and fall. But you see the change here wasn't 123 students. Line 12 shows you that a day after our meeting where we felt we had assumptions in hand based on prior knowledge, we were expecting 123. Well, it's 196 student drop. So without revisiting the spending assumptions, we would have been passing a double-digit tax increase to the electorate, to the residents of the Brattleboro member town region. So that is what's prompted what is an unusual process of essentially revisiting assumptions that we shared with you on December 18th. And you know, I know there's a lot of interest in explaining some of the detail. I don't want to go into too much now. Defer to the other folks. Just one more comment in terms of the context. The estimated school tax rate is still up more than what we would like to see. It's on line 26. You see it's up 6.5 cents or 3.8%, you know, which obviously is a much higher rate than our student enrollment change, and it's also, you know, obviously quite a bit higher than inflation rate. And we have not been proposing budgets at that level, but this is a extenuating circumstances. So Finance Committee asked us to come in at this level, and that's the basis and the context for these changes.
Thanks. So, Bob, you want to take over from there?
Okay, well, as Frank said, there were some late inning changes that caused us to have to reconsider some things, and I would say that the administrators have combed through again, and they've combed through everything, not just the particular items that they have come up with as suggestions for change. One of the key areas that we made some recent additional cuts to are in relation to the diversity coordinator position. However, that whole diversity program is still there, and there are resources to be applied to it. In particular questions about that, Steve Perrin or Keith would be happy to answer. But that gives us some additional, about $78,000 in savings. We've put in, and these are maybe non-controversial items I'll go through quickly. Reduce the electrical bill based on our involvement with the solar project that we have. We made some corrections in the operations and maintenance budget. And one key thing that we did as a result of our Finance Committee discussion last week was to take a little money out of our capital budget to do our maintenance shed, which is in the budget. We have a literally unsafe condition with the maintenance crew working from underneath the grandstand, and we decided that we want to continue to try to do that project, but rather than take it all out of operations, we would be drawing $100,000 from our capital reserve, which will still remain strong, the reserve fund. There were some weak security changes proposed, but in revisiting them with the facilities manager, it was determined that the money spent there was well spent, and we should not make any changes there. We discussed Latin and initially had considered some savings from that, discontinuing the Latin program. After revisiting that again, the plan is to retain Latin for this coming year and phase it out as the current students finish. So there's Latin 1, 2, and 3. There will be Latin 1 kids going on to Latin 2, so there would be no Latin 1 next year, right? But Latin 2 and 3, and it would be phased out. There's about $8,000 savings in science for furniture that was going to be expended that we will now pull from our own inventory of furniture. In BAMS, there are some significant changes since the last time. Significant reorganization, not so much maybe significant changes. Supplies and equipment, we had determined that we could save $25,000 from deferring some of the Chromebook replacement costs and make some changes in the technology, reduction in the technology department staff, teachers, and the one that probably needs some explaining is the elimination of the PEAK program, and this is part of the getting this whole program of kids that need extra assistance handled more on a full school basis. In other words, the high school and BAMS working together, and to make it a seamless continuation from the START program in the elementary school. And that would be something that, again, Keith and Steve have worked quite a bit on, and would be happy to give you further detail. In the Career Center, one more change that was made was to reduce the culinary instructor due to low enrollment, and take a little bit out of the culinary budget. We look at every program in the Career Center, and based on enrollment and student demand, we will make changes as we have to, and that's the one that came with these new changes since the December meeting. So that ends up giving us a budget that is essentially based on impact of the equalized students. It's not the same dollar level, but to make up and compensate for the fact that we suddenly have not an additional 120 something, we have an additional 200 reduction in our equalized students. This offsets that and keeps us at the same tax rate that we had proposed in December, within a few tenths of a cent. Is that right?
That's
Great. Maybe the next best way to go about talking about this is specifically if there's any particular questions from the board, but then I was thinking having the administrators talk about specific things related to their piece of the budget and the decisions that were made and why those were made the way they were.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the unexpected drop in equalized students is because of Vernon being pulled out early?
It's part of it, but I don't think that explains the increase on the school property tax. And the reason for that is when you look at your document that you have, and you look at the second page is the revenues. So the revenues, the second line from the top you see goes from 1.98 million to 3.4 million. $2.2 million increase. So that's, as we had discussed during the withdrawal agreement discussion, we thought it would be pretty much a wash in that we lose the kids, but we're still educating them, but we gain the tuition revenue, and that should have offset the.
That's exactly what was
tax rate.
confusing me. 'cause
Yeah.
that-
So the issue is that we didn't lose, as you see on that third page, we didn't lose just the 123 Vernon students. We lost 196 students. And that is associated with the equalization process that the state and only the State Agency of Education administers. That means we lost somewhere in the vicinity of another 196 minus 120, 70-something kids. And we know our actual enrollment didn't change that much. So unfortunately, I don't generate that data, and I can't explain the specifics, but I can say that Act 46 has removed a number of the protections around changes in enrollment from year to year. And what this reflects is our actual equalized enrollment without what's called the hold harmless provision, which is commonly referred to, you may have heard the term, the ghost student. It's where the state said, we understand it's difficult for school boards in 1 year, if you have a change of enrollment of, say, 10%, to change your staffing by 10%. So that several years ago, 10 years ago, they put in something called a hold harmless provision, which essentially said, well, even if Brattleboro Union High School dropped 10%, we're only going to give you a statistic that reflects no more than a 3.5% change. And over the years, that difference is accumulated until now. Act 46 said there are too many contradictory state incentives in the school funding formula, that contradict the expected outcomes, so they've removed it. And I would not expect to see this again. This is a one-time transition from a funding formula that's been in place essentially since 2009-10 is when they had the last significant amendment to it, Act 68. So I see this as a one-time, sort of an unexpected change for us, but that's the primary issue, I believe, is the hold harmless provision has been removed, and we have lost some students. We know that. It's not entirely just that funding formula.
Does that answer your question, Ina? Board members, any other questions? So maybe we can just take and kind of look at the way we're doing some restructuring and changing things up. And it doesn't matter which order we go in from there. If you guys want to explain that, that's
Sure.
great.
Jump in. So, first of all, for several years now, we've been extremely lucky that we've been able to carry out staff reductions, and we've done that by attrition. We've been very lucky that we've had a board that supported us and has provided a buyout incentive for our staff, and due to that, we've been able to reduce our costs quite a bit. Unfortunately, we're at the point where buyout's not fiscally really possible anymore. But in recent years, I have to point out that we have done reductions through attrition for the most part in art, English, math, social studies, science, and administration. So for the past several years, every time somebody has retired, we've looked long and hard at that position and asked ourselves, do we continue in that position, or do we try to consolidate? And for the most part, we've done just that. So when it came to this point of having to make decisions about where would we reduce further, one of the areas was in our Latin position. And as we look at Latin, it is the one course that BUHS and WSCSU offer that does not have a 7-12 or a K-12 presence. It's only offered at the high school. Our other courses lead students on trips abroad, or other courses lead students on various ventures. Latin, unfortunately, doesn't do that. In terms of enrollment, looking at Latin right now, we have 5 students in Latin 3. Of those 5 students, 2 of them are exchange students. We have 15 students in Latin 2, and we have 29 in Latin 1 right now. So that program is not as robust as we would like it to be. However, at the Finance Committee last week, it was raised that it might be in our best interest to allow students who've begun Latin to kind of finish out their Latin studies. And so we looked at that, and as we looked at that, we realized that in Latin 2, if we discount the 6 seniors entering it right now, that would leave 9 students who could potentially go on to Latin 3 next year. That would be a section of Latin 3. And then as we look at Latin 1, of our 29 students that are enrolled, 6 of those are seniors right now. That would leave 23 students that would go on to Latin 2 and then possibly on to Latin 3. So that's kind of our logic as we looked at where Latin would go. Turning to diversity, our diversity program has been here for a long time. It's a multi-part program. It involves having a diversity coordinator who does outreach with our faculty, who also does community outreach on a K-12 level, not just at the high school. Right now, though, we also have a diversity course, originally taught by Scott Tabachnik, then Casey Dean, and now Ashley Netto, Henry Zucchini, and Kevin Martell teach that course. All of our 9th graders are required to take that course. In addition, we have a restorative school day program and a peer mediation program run by Mike Sostak. In that venue, we spend a lot of time talking to students about various discipline infractions that are related to diversity, related to harassment of the 9 protected categories, and we work with those students on a case-by-case basis. So while we're going to discontinue that full-time position, we do have in place plans to continue our aware groups at the middle school and at the high school, and to have stipends available to the person who would be advising those groups. We also have set aside $15,000 to bring in professionals to complete specific tasks with specific groups of teachers. For example, we may have a group of English teachers who want to do a lesson study. They may want to do a book study. This person could come in, work with a teacher, perhaps co-teach the course, and from there, we're hoping to still get that targeted support in the classroom where we think it matters most. In terms of the other cuts with science and furniture, we kind of looked at that, and the other place we also cut is in the math department, and made some modest cuts there as well. So that's kind of an overview of the high school and the logic we used and where we are right now. So I'll defer to Keith.
Great, thank you.
Hey everyone. I want to acknowledge it's great that there's so many people here tonight, people with passion over, I assume, the budget. So it's great. We came at this as administrators, really not preferring to make a lot of cuts, but the numbers that Frank shared, kind of coming over the holiday, forced us to really have to reimagine some things and to evaluate things without a tremendous amount of time. And so we've done the best that we can given the financial constraints. And at least from my perspective, the cuts that have to be made are, I would argue that they don't have tremendous value to kids and families and a positive impact. It's just a really difficult reality of balancing finances with needs. And it's a difficult kind of scenario schools are facing right now. With that said, I made some simple reductions in supplies and equipment, cutting back on some Chromebook purchases. It met a small portion of what I felt I needed to reduce. I had to reduce a technology education position. One of the newer kind of, we had 2 teachers in that program, so we're still going to offer technology education just in a more limited role, and that was a clear savings for us. And then there was some restructuring, which has been challenging. When I look at our student population and our data, we have a lot of students who struggle with behavioral expectations. And we could take, there's a lot of clear data that says that about 5% of our students need extra supports. We've had a program called PEAK, which has been an alternative program for quite some time that has addressed some of that population in need in a really positive way. Tremendous gains with some individuals and providing programming that is really pretty outstanding. And I hate to even think about that option for students going away. However, I had to look at the fact that we had a ton of students beyond students who are in PEAK who need a lot more support. And we're running a very traditional model when it comes to discipline in many regards. Regular ed students who are either on 504 plans or no plan at all, who don't come into the school with the skills to stay in the classrooms and to deal with the challenges of being a middle school student. And STEP, which is an acronym, is really, and the state's produced recent documents really supporting the STEP model. STEP is a local acronym that kind of started at Academy School and has really been implemented pretty well at Academy, and it's branching out now to the other elementary schools. It's been implemented at BAM's BUHS mainly in the special ed department, and the SU's plans are to expand this program called STEP. STEP is essentially a model where we have a very highly trained or multiple highly trained individuals who have degrees in behavior management, who will come in and work. So we're addressing all students with this model in the regular classroom with tiered support. So the trained person is a BCBA, it's a behavioral certification, and they're kind of coaching, working with the teachers, and new paraprofessionals. We'll be hiring paraprofessionals specifically for behavioral supports, and frequently those paraprofessionals become an RBT, which is a registered behavior technician. And that was where I felt our need was, that there were that 5% of students needed more than what we've been offering between PEAK and our pretty traditional model. And so STEP and the trained people that we'll bring in, a lot of the role will be addressing what we call Tier 1 regular education. The teachers, working with the teachers to make adjustments in classroom instruction in order to meet that 5%, meet some of their needs. You could argue that there are still going to be some students who won't respond the way we would hope with that support, and that's been some of what PEAK has addressed in the past. So I recognize that it's going to be a big change for everyone at BAMS. I haven't even really had much of a chance to talk to the staff about this since it happened. You know, these changes were kind of spurred very recently. So I'm excited about the change from a perspective of bringing in some highly trained staff, but it's really difficult to also end some things that have been around for a long time. And been very effective. That's a brief overview of the changes at BAMS. I hope I didn't forget anything major.
Great. And Drew, do you want to touch base about the Career Center stuff?
Yep, I can speak really directly to what Woody just stated, that we are going to be cutting that culinary position to a .5 position, and that's really primary due to enrollment, and with the cut of the supplies budget also. Without students putting on the catering events and things like that, the meaningfulness of a program like that isn't full of students, does come into question. So we will still be able to maintain that culinary program, but due to enrollment, it will be a .5 position.
Any board member questions on anything that they talked about? And so I know that there's a lot of folks here that probably everybody wants to, yes, Ian, sorry.
So how many total positions are we cutting across the schools?
So right now at the high school this year, we're reducing the diversity coordinator position. And then Latin is going to be offered next year, but next year will be the last year.
And a half a position at the
For the culinary
career center?
But they've also had another, do you want to talk about?
Yep, and we had previously cut our horticulture program.
So that's 2 from our December 18 draft budget, which is the last one you've seen, would be a net of 2.
At BAM's 1 full-time position and then some restructuring, which has some impact on, a significant impact on some staff.
Yes.
So Steve, I just want to clarify or ask, so we're we're proposing to cut the diversity coordinator, but not the diversity programs.
Right. So the portion of the program, the 9th grade diversity course, is unchanged. That'll continue to be required for all 9th graders, that'll continue to go on. And then with the programming, the plan is to continue offering the aware groups at the high school and middle school, and to also set aside funds to do some targeted professional development and classroom work for teachers. So,
Everybody good on board?
Wow, you explained kind of a new concept of diversity at the last meeting. I enjoyed that. I was wondering if you could repeat that for me again?
Sure. So we're trying to expand it so that we're looking at all marginalized students, not just one particular group of students. So we're looking at religious diversity, students that may have learning needs or differences, racial diversity, students living in poverty, so that we're trying to broaden the umbrella. We're trying to ensure that whomever is working with us with diversity is working, co-teaching with teachers, looking both at materials, but also being able to show teachers, this is how you would use these materials in your classroom, and this is how we would integrate them into your units. And having people working with the administrative team so that we are more aware of what's happening throughout our SU in terms of marginalized students.
Russ?
Yeah, first of all, let me apologize for being late. I got the revised agenda and I thought the only change was something at the very end. I didn't see the change in the start time, so I'm very sorry about that. I thought I was 10 minutes early, so much for that. Let me just ask on the, and Steve, I totally missed your presentation, and I always enjoy it. But anyways, and maybe you've already discussed this, and I imagine it will come up more, but it's a big staff at the high school, all sorts of programs. Why was it looks like the only current cut is the diversity coordinator. And I also missed, I knew there were things coming down that we'd hear, and I missed the summary at the beginning. But of all the positions, why was that the one?
So originally there were 2 positions. Originally it was Latin and diversity.
Right.
And we made the decision, the finance committee asked us to revisit those assumptions. And so we made the decision to put the other one back. It really is about the direct impact with students. We've had attrition and we've cut in all of our other departments over time. And, I kind of alluded to this before, we've had cuts in art, English, math, social studies, administration, modern classical language. So we've done a decent job of paring down. And so as I look at those departments, they have they have, for the most part, robust numbers. Our foundations and art classes are routinely running about 23, 24. Photography is always running at a surplus. So there's areas where I'm reluctant to cut because those are direct impact with students every day. They're taking those classes, working with teachers every single day. So I think if we can use that fact and use, as Lyle pointed out, the funds to kind of address diversity issues within those classrooms using professionals on a targeted basis, I think it's going to be effective.
And just to follow up a little bit, and then I'll let other people speak. Part of it comes from, I teach economics, and we deal with, even though she's dealing with scarcity and how to allocate resources facing scarcity. And there's some notion of basically when you're making marginal decisions in terms of where to cut or where to add, you don't just look at the dollar item. And I don't know what is the dollar item for cutting the diversity coordinator. Is that in our budget or not? I don't know.
Frank's
If
probably give me,
so it's not just the number, but there's all sorts of things that cost more than $78,000. There's all sorts of things that cost less than $78,000. It's the value that you get from whatever you're spending. And so, I know over the years, these are the exact decisions that you've had to make, and they're hard decisions. And cutting the hockey program or something that predates me on the board. There are some that are hit people in different sorts of ways. But are you convinced that the value, because there's value to everything. There's value to the Latin, there's value to the program that Keith is talking about cutting, and that the WRCC is going to give value to those. Is that the best place to go? And also addressing maybe Frank and Bob and Lyle of whether or not you look across the three schools. When I was on the town school board, there were three schools plus EES, the Head Start, Early Head Start, and of course that was separately funded. But the three schools, it was done cooperatively and figured out some schools needed more increases or more cuts, and that was that approach taken here as well, in terms of which, where sort of that value for the dollar. Were those comparisons made, or were you just looking at if the high school has to cut a certain amount?
We really looked at all three schools as well as the district-wide budget, and Keith and I did that in consultation with Lyle and with Frank, and we really thought long and hard about where would we, what cut is going to be the most prudent cut to make, and where, is there a way, Lyle pointed out, is there a way that we can still bring in professionals on a limited basis to kind of do this work still in our classrooms? So rather than, so I think it'll be beneficial to be able to sit down with a person and say, and a department head and say, this is what we'd like to do in this department, and have that person come in and do that discrete task and that discrete work with the teacher, the department, and the students. I think that's actually an added bonus.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be lots of other questions, and I have others, but I'll stop for now.
Yeah.
I was just handed a question from the audience, but I believe there's going to be time for audience questions, so you'll have a chance to ask it directly. My question is, so we have a 17% drop in effective students. Seems like, in part, the hold harmless provision was a bad plan, because we have been giving credit for years for students that really we shouldn't have. But this thing was keeping them ghost students. So technically we've been overstaffed based on what we actually should have had for real actualized or equalized pupils. Why are we cutting so few positions when we just found out that we were 17% overstaffed?
Well, I would just respond in terms of, we know the community has been passing our budgets with the tax rate in the $1.70, $1.80 realm, which is, it's on the high side in the state of school property tax rates. So we know that the community has been willing to make a commitment at that level, even though it is in the very top tier of school tax rates in the state. Without this adjustment, we would have gone well above that historical level of financial liability to our citizens. So I guess to answer your question is the community has been consistently approving our budgets at the level of spending that we have proposed, and we're trying to keep our spending as it affects the tax rate and the obligation for both income sensitized contribution to school property tax and or school education fund at the same level. So I think that's one answer. I'm sure there are others.
Just as a little more looking backward historical, it's about 10 years now in a row that we've asked the administration to give us a budget that was essentially level service and as close to level funding as possible. And if you go back and add up all the last 10 years with the pluses and minuses, our budget has increased very little. And that's in an atmosphere across the state where budgets are being approved, 3, 4, 5, 6% have been. I'm not saying that's going to happen from here on out, but we have been very good about cutting back when we could. The program for early retirement made a huge difference. We did that for 3 or 4 years. You can only do that for so long. So it was a little bit of a shock that came out of left field. There's additional 70 students in the equalized formula. Unfortunately, as Frank stated, that is the state's figuring. They do their math. We kind of know what the parameters are somewhat, but that's a formula until it comes to us, which it's supposed to do by December 15th. Until we get that, we're flying blind a little bit. Normally, our anticipation is a little better than it turned out to be this time. And it doesn't directly answer your question about why we've only cut 2 people, but if you look at the decreases that Steve referred to over the last 6 or 7 years, we've actually made quite a few cuts along the way. This isn't the first. This is the biggest impact that we've seen on the equalized students. So.
I'd like to say, Ian, too, I'm on the finance committee. I'm not happy with the 3.8% increase as well, but we had to do this in a.
Can people speak up, please? I agree.
Thank you. Hi. I'm not happy with the 3.8% increase as it stands now. I wish we could cut more, but we had the 14-day period to do this, so we haven't been able to look at it with, as in-depth as we'd like to. So the administration, I guess, found things that they could cut. It wouldn't hurt too much right now. I mean, we didn't have much time to really look at it. That was my problem.
Ian, I wanted to say that part of the reason we haven't cut in the past as heavily as maybe you would like to consider is trying to keep a high quality program. You start slashing, you start losing out, you lose opportunities in programming for kids. So as administrators, we're trying to maintain and improve our programs as best we can while maintaining a balance of spending. And, you know, we're not slashing it. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to maintain and keep a great program and offer a lot of opportunities for kids that other schools don't offer. I think we do a great job of that, and that's because of the support of the board and the taxpayers in town. And
Well, I guess the way I look at it is, you know, I'm a grocer. So I have my night crew and we have X number of cases we're getting on a truck. And I schedule accordingly. And if I find out, hey, wait, our reports were wrong, we're getting 17% less than that, I'm gonna cut my staffing by 17%.
Children aren't groceries.
I would also say that 17% is not actual students that have dropped. It's a number coming from the state as opposed to the actual student population. So.
I was wondering if maybe you could clarify that, Frank. 120 students that BUHS was able to count now is counted, I believe, by the town of Guilford. Is that, by the town of Vernon.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the 17% is kind of a misnomer because 120 of them will still be here. It's how the state, and I don't really understand exactly, you know, what that means. Well, that 120 is Vernon now gets it.
Actually, Sean, that is an excellent point because they're not actually going away.
No, they're not.
Tuition, so they appear on a different line.
So
it's not 17%.
That's
No,
right.
it is not. It's,
The net number is more like 70, which is 7%.
Yeah, I see, 7 or 8.
Yeah.
But that's the problem is it's a very difficult number to go from 1,156 to 960. Is that really is the crux of the financial problem, unfortunately.
I think what it basically added 700,000 to our bottom line, roughly.
The effect is as if we did, yes. When you lose 70 kids, it's the equivalent in the, when you're looking to relieve the tax rate or offset the tax rate, yes, it's about that amount of money, 700,000.
And we're still under the penalty.
We are, yes, the penalty is at 17,816 and we're at 17,443.
17,433 for students, correct?
17,443 it's what's called education spending per equalized student, which is a school funding formula law. You know, the way it's defined, the way you calculate it, that is the number that is used to set the tax rate. It's compared to against something called the they call it a property dollar equivalent yield statistic. That number is 9,842. So they take our number divided by that. That's the tax rate. So if our spending goes up, the tax rate goes up. If our spending goes down, the tax rate goes down.
Are board members good, so we can open up to the public at this point? Okay. So again, I know there's a lot of people here and I know a lot of people want to speak and that's great. I'm gonna remind you please to identify yourself, wait for me to call on you so that everybody can be heard and not people aren't getting talked over. And make sure you identify yourself and what town you're from so BCTV can capture that and our clerk can capture that as well. That'd be really great. Sean?
I was wondering if you gotta have a time limit.
I think if we can kind of keep things to a minute or so as your comments and your questions, and we'll do our best to keep our answers so that we're not, and then if somebody else has already spoken about that, I know a lot of people want to support each other and that's great, but if we can get people that haven't spoken about something to speak about something that's different, that'd be great too. Okay? So let's I'm just going to kind of go this way, so let's start here.
I defer to Curtis Reed first, and I'll go after him.
All right, Curtis, go ahead.
Do you have a microphone that you can give people?
We don't. Just like I think I said in the beginning, we are never used to anybody ever coming to our meetings. So this was a little bit new for us, hence some of the chair issues and things like that too. So, go ahead, Curtis.
Great. My name is Curtis Reed. I'm the father of a senior, the last of my 3 children that are going to BUHS. I'm also executive director of the Vermont Partnership for Fairness University. Our mission is to make Windham County the most desirable and exceptional destination for folks of color. One, because we have needs in our workforce. We have needs for a workforce that can respond to the needs of the multicultural marketplace. For that to happen, we really need to have someone who's coordinating within the school district efforts around inclusion and equity. If we don't, then the long-term effect of that is that our workforce will be underprepared to deal with realities of a marketplace which is growing blacker and browner every day. So to cut the diversity coordinator position is really, over the long term, puts more nails in our economic coffin. That's one thing. The second thing, the question I wanted to ask was, how many staff of color do we have in this building? Okay. This is about the education of our students and creating a social climate where everyone feels as though they have someone with whom they can identify with. How many staff of color do we have here?
Okay. To answer your question, I'm going to defer to the administration because I don't know. Across all 3 schools.
Your EEO report says you have how many?
I believe there's about 15 in the entire supervisory union, including BUHS 6, the Brattleboro Town Schools, Putney, Guilford, Vernon, and Emerson.
In the building, like Curtis asked?
Right.
One at BAMS, June. Yeah. Well, I guess staff of color, are we including?
Educators,
Sure.
people who are in contact with students on a daily basis.
Let's say 3.
You have 3.
Right.
Okay, so what you're doing?
Five in the 3 buildings.
And the other question is, how many do we have that are, how many that don't identify as sexually normative? I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about here.
But in terms of students of color.
Right.
Okay, can we please be respectful so that people can be heard, and hissing at people when they answer a question is really disrespectful. So if we could calm that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
So students of color, as well as white students, need to have examples of adults of color in professional positions, okay? So when you take 20 or 30% of that opportunity away, you are lessening the educational opportunities for all students. My second bone to pick is that if 20% of our student body throughout the town schools are students of color, why is it that the BUHS website does not showcase any kids of color on the website? It's a matter of sort of unconscious bias that, again, drives home the point that we really need to have a coordinator looking at issues of inclusion and equity and making sure that that's happening at all levels within the organization, within the school district. Now, I brought this to your attention, Steve, several months ago about the visuals. We're trying to attract folks and families of color to come to this area, and they check out the website and they say, this is an all-white school, I'm not going to send my kids there. So,
Right, and I think if you remember my response to you was that, and we're off topic, so I don't want to spend a lot of time here. But as I said to you on my email, that we also, that's a rotating website, the banner headline changes all the time. The time when you looked happened to be the time when we also had 25 German exchange students here.
Right.
And I think, I disagree with you that there were no students of color represented. I think there were. There are a whole diversity of students. There were males, there were females, there are all kinds of students. And Curtis, we look at that, and we do. And I think you should take another look. I mean, that's a rotating website.
Just today.
Right.
And they're visibly students of color. The banners have been the same since the last time that we spoke. So, you know, when we have the kind of sort of unconscious bias not to make changes, even when those changes are being brought to your attention, really drives home the point for us is that, you know, how can we convince people to come here, entrepreneurs to come here, families to come here, to work, because places like GS Precision, Commonwealth Dairy, Omega Optical, all need folks to work there. I mean, we need about 1,000 people in Windham County just alone for work. And we can't attract them, we can't attract a diverse set of people to come here if the current situation persists. So I'm gonna leave it there.
Thank you. Okay, so I started over here before, and, okay. Please don't forget to identify yourself.
No, I won't. My name is Janaki Natarajan, and I'm the director of the Spark Teacher Education Program, which has been given permission by the State Department, by the State of Vermont Education Department, to continue with 7 years of social justice, K through 12 training of teachers. So we train teachers, and many of them are here tonight, and are also placed in many of our schools. That's my, and I've also taught under Andy Pachuli and Joe Rivers and Bob Peoples, who started the AWARE program, 7th and 8th grade in BAMS, and I also taught in the high school. I was also the first coordinator of the diversity program. I started it in 1999, in order to face the fact that there were Hakenkreuzes, which is anti-Semitic, Nazi kreuz, not swastikas actually, that were put on various bushes, as well as the whole business of the flag and the colonels and so on. It got to be a point when there was a great deal of animosity amongst our children in the school, and that was under Mr. Sprague, who was enormously helpful and very innovative in the way he dealt with us. What worries me now with this group is that 19 years later, that we're still somehow repeating the same notions of discipline, infraction, how to get, what to do with it, and with something called diversity, what shall we call diversity? It's my failure in that program if we have not gone farther than this in our philosophy or in our learning in this room. And I find myself listening to all of you repeating those words of 20 years ago, which were really still about, oh, what shall we do? Tear out our hair. What are we going to do with these children? In terms of their racism, in terms of their religious differences. Our superintendent, who's been very supportive over the years, said that, yes, we want to now expand it. Good, but it has always been expanded. There's been religious diversity that has been talked about. There have been learning needs, poverty, because white children are poor, and we're talking about white children who are poor as well, and black, and color, whatever. The point is, why are you not able to look at the deepest aspect of this kind of learning that the children had better have? And it has been questioned as to how much that will take in terms of money. You were very good about talking about what is the value of money. Why is it that we're still talking about, as somebody said, well, we have a 9th grade course. Yes, that 9th grade course was put in after a lot of struggle. The restorative justice, but the infractions, why is that connected to color? I went to Montpelier to testify against the fact that the diversity program should not come under hazards. That was where it was placed. If that, what I'm saying is not understood, I would be very happy to give a seminar and some readings for all of you to do. And I will state that that may be necessary from what I'm hearing this evening. So all those diversities have been looked at, have been done after I left. And I left particularly so that this would then go into administrative hands at that point. And two administrators, if you remember, still under Mr. Sprague. That didn't work. Then we had a committee. None of it has worked very well. What do I mean by worked? It hasn't, the world scene has not been brought into the curriculum, into the language, into the culture of all the children, including the poor white children who call themselves trailer trash. When children call themselves by these demeaning names, we have not succeeded. When we have to get experts to come and talk about discipline, and we had a bunch of elders sitting here with our children, then that moral voice, and I am saying moral voice for better than any other word, has not been loudly enough expressed by us, you and me. It also means at this time, that at this time, we are being, I shouldn't hold it with two hands. That at this time, we are bowing down to the overseers from Washington, D.C., where I taught for 5 years, both in Lorton Prison as well as in the public schools. That just at this time when this country is being looked at as becoming even more supremacist and becoming not capable of dealing with the world, we are following those wisps, cutting the one program that tries to teach the history of the world. It's not anti-white, if that's the fear somewhere in this town, that the whites should not be left out. That's not the point of it. It's not leaving out anything else but Catholicism or any other denomination. The diversity program to which Bernie Sanders came to speak, Howard Dean came to speak, all kinds of people came to speak during not only Mr. Sprague's time, but Mr. Day's time and so on. And I know that Mr. Perrin has support for the program, cannot be done within one class called 9th grade. It has to penetrate the history, the mathematics, the science of all of these classes. And when that is not done, then the basis of the critical intellectual culture and humanity of the country will go down. And that is already happening. We don't want this for anywhere in the world, and we certainly don't want to start it. It's been going on everywhere. Do we want to be like Arizona? Carting out books in front of the children of any other kind of counter-narrative book, supposedly meaning, yes, Hispanic people lived here, Native people lived here. You should look at and come to the diversity stuff that's done, not just in one class. And it's certainly, Mr. Sostak is fantastic. But it's not about restorative justice. It's not about discipline. It's about all the children getting the benefit of what the world is about. And that's what you want to cut. So you're not looking at the deepest nature of the intellectual work, which will increase their understanding of the world, which will then make them get a livelihood. None of this. So I'm really quite disappointed in the lack of imagination when we come to numbers. Thank you.
Donna Dever. I have been a member of this community for the past 15 years. I have served in nearly every capacity I can think. I've been a Big Sister, been on the board of Big Sisters. I have worked with United Way. I worked at dental office and been in many of your mouths. I served cocktails, and now I'm a parent in this community. I'm also a member of Black Lives Matter Vermont, and I'm a student at the University of Amherst in Massachusetts. And the reason I'm a student there is because I can see that in my community, there are very few teachers of color. So for a young black person, or person of any color, growing up in this town, you have no one to look to as your role model, as a guide. And when you don't have that, it limits the possibilities of what you think you can achieve. And I'm listening to these wonderful words that people are saying, but I am watching this board. You are all white. And it breaks my heart that you are in a position to take the job of a woman of color in our community, and my daughter won't get the chance to have her as a teacher, and not one person of color is sitting around that table to help make this decision. It breaks my heart. And I really hope that you could hear the words and you could hear us. I have stayed here. I am from DC. I have never lived in a community with so many white people in my life. But I am here and I am staying because I love this community. And I think we don't have to be like DC. We don't have to model what Trump is modeling. And you have this choice right now to take a job from someone in our community who deserves it. And our students need her. That's all.
My name is Brandy Starr. I'm a parent of young children. I also serve on your select board currently, where we have been working with members of the community to directly acknowledge the fact that we lack diversity on our select board, in our town government, town with a capital T, while also acknowledging the fact that particularly in the school system, our diversity is growing. Curtis, was it 20 or 24%?
20%.
So when I hear words like awareness group, focus group, anything like that, I've been trying to find a more eloquent word for what I want to say, but the only word I can say is it sounds superficial. It sounds whitewashing. It doesn't get to the heart of anything. When we started trying to embrace hiring practices at where I worked previously, my one fear was people don't want to come in and apply for a job when they don't see themselves represented. When people are feeling vulnerable looking for work, and who feels more vulnerable than our students? Especially students who don't see themselves represented as a whole in the community. We need to keep this position, and I don't want to hear of it being replaced with awareness groups or focus groups or a paid expert who's probably going to be white that's going to come in. We have somebody right here who dedicates herself to these children. And this to me is a huge mistake. It's my first school board meeting, and I am highly disappointed and disheartened to hear of this. I understand tax dollars. That's what I do every single week. Do we plow your sidewalks? Do we get you a new fire truck? Do we hire an HR person who will also be handling working with diversity program? I do this. $78,000. I'm pretty sure we just gave that to the DBA to make downtown nice. And while I'm not saying that's not a good investment, this is also a good investment, and this is an investment that starts at the roots. This isn't us trying to come in with money to fix something that's already aged. This is us having an opportunity to affect our community at a young level, at the root level. And I would caution against doing this, and I am going to leave it at that for tonight. My name is Ellen Kumovicus, and I'm a parent in the community as well as a teacher. Although I look very white, my family is of color. And I almost didn't speak because it's very difficult when it involves someone that you love as much as your own children. But Stephen, you said that that the way that you chose to do this particular cut was you looked at how the program directly impacted students. And I don't know, I know before I had children of color, and this is my third child going through the system, 2 of them have graduated, and I have one at Academy, who we just recently received our second form letter that she was a victim of racial harassment. But those are the easy things to handle. The outright nigger on the bus, that's easy. It's the subtle, implicit bias that happens on a daily basis that only someone like Michaela really understands. And that's why it's just crucial that we have Michaela in this position. My daughter needs her. Every student needs her, not just the children of color, but the children that are not of color, that have been raised without understanding what diversity is. I have a student in my school at Putney Central who saw me with my family in a restaurant, a local restaurant, and he was amazed that I was the only white person in my family. And he wasn't being racist, in the least, he was just confounded. He just couldn't imagine how that could happen. And we need Michaela for kids like that as well. So I'm just very curious how, given the fact that so much of implicit bias is invisible to people who are not experiencing the implicit bias, or who are not raising children who are experiencing that implicit bias, how you assess the direct impact of what Michaela is doing. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tony Amari. I am a student at Brattleboro Union High School, and I'm just here to say that I think that it's very disappointing to hear that we only have three staff members of color, and I have also been a victim of racial harassment, and I come home to my parents and they ask me why I don't talk to anybody about it. And it's because, like, the people that I'm supposed to talk to about it don't understand, because everybody is white. And I go to the root, and I hear that Michaela is going to lose her job. And to me, that says that I mean, honestly, I don't understand, because I don't trust many people in my school. And Michaela has to be one of the only staff members that I will actually talk to. I don't even go to my own guidance counselor because I know that she wouldn't understand what I'm going through. So I am just very disappointed that someone of my community is losing their job when I need them the most.
My name's Karen Saunders. I live in Brattleboro. I taught in this school district for 30 years. I just left to be a full-time grad student again. I also had 2 children who went through this school district. My sons, Jordan Peoples and Desmond Peoples, really benefited from the fact that we had a diversity coordinator. And you know what? So did all of the many, many children that I taught over the years, who I love as much as, sorry Desmond and Jordan, but I love them as much. And they benefited too. Largely they benefited because their teachers benefited from it. Because we have had in this district what many districts don't have. We have had that professional development around issues of diversity and equity. And it has not been just about race. One of the amazing things is that we've had diversity coordinators who are able to say, I understand what I face in this world, And that helps me understand what other people face in this world. What Lyle said was exactly right. The diversity has to be about all people who are marginalized. Equity has to be about all people who are marginalized. And that is what it has been in this district because of us having this leadership from a diversity coordinator. It has not always been easy in some of the meetings with teachers. It has been uncomfortable at times. Learning is uncomfortable. And it has made such a difference for our students. And we may just have a new bumper sticker from somebody over here earlier who said that their children not groceries. We love our groceries and they're important to us, but we love our children in different ways. Having a diversity coordinator is not a luxury to be cut back. It's a necessity, it's essential now more than ever. It has been essential, it continues to be essential. And maybe it's just been essential because of who we've got too. We're so fortunate. So please do the right thing. Let the children who are still coming up through our schools continue to be this fortunate. Let teachers continue to learn, to do that learning that is sometimes painful, but means that other kids aren't going through what my son went through in 6th grade, coming home crying because of the books his teacher chose to read. Michaela, are you still? Okay, because there were some meetings with teachers where Michaela talked about those books, and a couple of us teachers talked about those books. It was hard. Teachers made hard decisions. And our kids, because the teachers learned and had the courage to make changes, our kids have been better off. Please help them continue to be better off. Thank you.
Hi, Robin Morgan. I'm from Brattleboro, and I know many of you guys from supervisory union meetings because I'm also on the elementary schools board. And I just wanted to speak about my experience with Michaela in that regard and in her position. I noticed that you mentioned that outreach to the elementary district, not just of Brattleboro, but of the whole SU, is part of her role. I can only presume that the reason that you choose to fund that part of her position is because you know that those are your students, they're coming, and if you feel that diversity education and having an equitable school is important at this level, we need those students coming all the way from kindergarten in that type of learning. And that's something that, you know, she's able to do in her role now. And we're working really hard on our board to increase the level of training and support around that that's available to our teachers. And as Brandy mentioned, so is the town. So I don't understand why the high school district would go in the opposite direction. Everybody else is trying to increase the awareness and knowledge and culture of racial justice, gender justice, you know, economic justice in our school systems and in our town systems. Why would we then take that out at this level? It makes no sense. Secondly, I've heard a lot of mentions about positions that directly impact students every day. And I cannot understand how someone would think that this diversity coordinator doesn't do that. She impacts way more students every day than someone who teaches a single discipline of course. She's impacting every student in this, all three of these schools and in all the rest of the supervisory union schools with the training and support that she's offering the teachers. And thirdly, I also want to speak as a parent in the town schools. I have a 3rd grader and a 1st grader right now and an infant, so I'm looking at the long term here. And I know that when we talk about replacing a full-time position with stuff like a specialist coming in and offering a presentation or training, that you cannot have this work done in dribs and drabs. It's a long-term goal, okay? And I'm looking at what is this school gonna be like when my 7-month-old gets here if we don't have anyone centering this work now. And the person who educated me to know how long-term this type of work is Michaela. I, as a school board member, have leaned heavily on her, trying to find out what do we need to do to bring this up to the level it needs to be at in our elementary schools. And without having a coordinator to go to, I don't know where I would have turned for that kind of information, planning, and strategies. So I feel that it would be detrimental not only to these 3 schools, but to the whole SU were we to eliminate this position. And I know as a school board member, it can be very difficult when it comes down to these numbers. I mean, we just went through this on our own board, trying to get our budget so that we didn't increase the tax burden on the taxpayers any. And I know that that's very important. However, as someone who's going to be sending kids here, I would much rather pay an extra amount of taxes on my portion of $78,000 than send my kids to a school that does not believe this is the most important work that they're doing.
I'll be quick. My name's Mary Gannon. I actually live in Winchester, New Hampshire, so I might be the only New Hampshire resident in the room. But I do quite a bit of work in the district, and I've worked with some of you, and I know some of the faces in the room as well. What I want to speak to specifically, and I want to first say that I second all that's been said here tonight. I was deeply concerned when I got the phone call this afternoon that this position was being considered as a cut in the budget. What I want to speak specifically to is this idea of bringing in a professional, and I tend to be one of those people that gets brought in, another white person, as somebody said, who comes in and works with teachers and with administrators and staff. And I think, you know, based on my experience, I've been working in Vermont schools for over a decade now, doing that kind of work. What I can tell you is that the only way that it's effective to bring consultants in and professionals like myself who do this work and have a knowledge and skill set in this, as many teachers do as well, is if there's a point person in the district who is making sure that the work that these professionals bring in is being maintained. So you can't, these one and dones where you bring somebody in, I've done them, I get paid to do this, and then I look for that person, like a Michaela, who is going to take the work and bring it forward. And so I don't want you all to be fooled by this idea that you can set aside $15,000 and have someone like myself, mostly, by the way, are mostly white folks that come in, which is a problem, and then think that the work is going to continue. You need to have somebody located in the district who's working directly with teachers. The other thing I just want to say quickly is, you know, I came here, the first time I entered into this district was under the work of Jim Day. And Jim Day brought me in because he said, I want you to come in and do a session on white privilege. And I thought, oh wow, this is going to be really interesting. And he was the only person in the school district or in the high school at the time that was really willing to say, I don't understand why we need to do this, I'm confused, but I know it's really important. So what I want to say to those of you that are sitting here now and can make these decisions, that there has been a history of folks who have been working very hard on issues of social justice in this school district and in this community. And if you choose to cut this, what you're saying to all of us who have been doing that work and people who are no longer here is that the work doesn't have a place in Brattleboro. And that is a grave mistake. It's a step backwards. And I will also say, given the current political, social, and cultural climate that we are in, and other folks have said this, I want to reiterate it, it is absolutely a necessity that all of our children have an opportunity to have conversations and learn the history, white, Asian, African American, white kids living in, I don't care who it is. We have got to make this education around multiculturalism and social justice available to everyone. And Brattleboro, in terms of the state, has been the lead on that in many ways. And so it would be a grave mistake to cut this out.
It's been very interesting to hear all these points of view. Unfortunately, we have a real time constraint in getting the budget together. It has to be passed by this board, I believe, tonight in order for us to have our big meeting in February. In light of the outpouring from the community, and we've only had one other time in my serving on the board when there's been this many people because there was gonna be a cut. And at that time, we reconsidered our cut. And so I think it might be the time for the board somehow to come to a discussion. I mean, I could make a motion, but it might be good to have discussion on whether, considering the public output and public outpouring, that perhaps we should consider not making this cut.
Absolutely. Ruth.
Frank, what are the implications of putting this position back in financially?
Financially, well, if we looked at our tax rate that we were trying to stay below, which was the 4%, we were at 3.8 at page 3. If we restored this, we would be at $1.78, which would be 4.3% increase based on what we know now from the legislature. So 7.3 cents instead of 6.5 cents.
Okay. Would we still be under the threshold, or would we over the?
We would be under the threshold, 17,524.
Okay.
Can we talk about other aspects of
We-
the
we-
budget
we-
first?
yes, we will.
I think it's premature to
Yes.
think about what's happening with the budget without talking about other issues as well.
Yes.
There are people here to discuss other things too.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. All right. Sean.
I think when you talk about the number, the cents, it just seems like a very small amount. But I would have to say that the Finance Committee has been working very hard on this budget for quite a good time. And we know that there are financial limits to how high. And we've had incredible guidance from our Frank Rucker, our finance person. Cuts in the high school are very difficult. But look what the state is facing. It's terrible. We really have a financial crisis, unfortunately. So I appreciate very much the public input tonight, but I want you to know that you think that is a very small amount in terms of the cents, but we have to be responsible we're responsible for the tax rate. So it's a very hard job. And we have worked very, very diligently with the guidance of our administrators and our Frank Rucker, our business man. So I want you to understand our position. Don't think it's something that you can just say, oh, well, it's just, we'll keep going the way we are, because we can't. So I just want everybody to understand.
Okay. So, hang on a second, please. So, I know that a lot of people have spoken related to the diversity coordinator position, and as it was pointed out, there's some folks that want to talk about other aspects of some of the budgetary issues. So before we give any sort of directive to the administration and the Finance Committee, Sean, maybe we can hear from some of those folks, and then we can go from
I
there.
just have a technical question, Bashi.
Sure.
To ask whether, since it's under the high school, and this, why it can't also it be put into the central office? Is there a possibility of maneuvering that?
Not for, I don't think for this year, but also all that would be doing would be, it wouldn't really necessarily, wouldn't necessarily negatively impact the tax rate, because it would still affect the tax rate overall. It would be in a different place. Huh?
You're talking about next year then?
Potentially.
Because obviously, if the position serves the entire district, then it should go under central office.
Perhaps, yeah. All right, so for folks not related to the diversity piece, start here with Clerk.
Flo Levin, teacher coordinator of the PEAK program at Brattleboro Middle School.
For people who don't know, the PEAK program is an experiential, hands-on, community-based program for students who struggle. There is not a huge outpouring of students here because we found out about this at the last minute, and these are the students who cannot speak for themselves. These are, some of the most disenfranchised students in the school. They are not necessarily behavior problems. Some of these kids are just students who quietly drop out, who just don't show up at school. The beauty of the PEAK program is that it serves all students. It's not about labels. It's not about whether they're special ed or 504 or general ed. It's just a different approach to learning. And the reorganization language doesn't quite, I don't really understand that way of looking at it, because what we're talking about is not reorganization or restructuring. It's an extremely different approach. And not all students need a behavior program that has them in their general classroom, pulls them out, puts them back in. They still have 15 or 20 transitions a day and, work with multiple adults. The beauty of the PEAK program is that we can meet students where they're at. We're out in the community. We're tying learning to the real world. We're helping them figure out that it matters that they learn, and the things that they learn matter, and it's meaningful to stay in school. And so I would say that I truly understand that this budget stuff is phenomenally complicated. There are no great answers. We have to make extraordinarily hard decisions. This isn't about my job. This is about the students whom we serve, and whether what we do really is looking at a wide array of approaches. Because, we're supposed to be talking about flexible pathways and Act 77 and more personalized learning, and the kinds of things that many students need are the kinds of things that we do. So, I also have to add that a year and a half ago, we doubled the staff in our program, and in this year's budget, there was actually supposed to be yet another position. So, sort of finding out this afternoon that actually not only is there not going to be any addition, the entire program is going to be cut, is really shocking. And we didn't have time to round up people who, for the most part, would be very, very uncomfortable coming here. But so I have two quick questions. And one is I want to clarify the budget process so we know moving forward what's going to happen tonight and what that means and what next steps are, so that we have an opportunity to have other people speak if they want to, if the time allows for it. That's one. And my other question is just about what is the cost of Kindle Farm for a year? This is not a rhetorical question, it's an actual question. How much does Kindle Farm cost?
I want to address the salary thing. That was just really quick. You mentioned an increase. It's not an increase. It's taking half of a position was funded out of special ed in the past.
Yeah.
So that was the change that you're referring to. It
Well,
was
the
put
change
back in
I'm
your.
referring to is I was told the entire program is being eliminated.
No, but you had mentioned that there was an increase in salary in the program, and it was just a change from some funding from special ed to regular ed.
So how much does Kindle Farm cost a year?
I believe it's $47,000.
So $47,000 for Kindle Farm. How much does priority placement cost a year?
In the third.
I don't know.
30,000?
Depends on the student.
So if Pete keeps a couple of kids a year for 2 years of middle school out of an alternative placement so that they can be in the community with their peers in a school setting where they're learning those transferable skills, which is what we're all supposed to be working on in terms of communication, self-direction, practical problem solving, all the stuff that these kids need, we're easily paying for the program. And those same kids will not necessarily make it in the model that we're calling STEP. They just won't.
So, you know, what I'm urging is that we really look at the bigger picture. And as I say, it's not about my job, but it's about those kids who can't come here and speak for themselves. And talk about diversity. I mean, Peak really does serve an incredibly diverse population and hugely needy. I mean, we need to talk about socioeconomic diversity as well. And as we know, there are so many kids in this community who are struggling. And Peak does the kind of wrap-around thing where we're the ones calling their parents every day. We're the ones getting them boots. We're the ones saying, let's go shopping and cook and figure out what it costs to budget for food. So it's a very different approach, and I think we need to be doing more of it, not less. Thank you.
My name is Kate Conway, and I'm a special educator at BAM. I've been familiar with STEP programs, and I have had a student go into Peak. And my experience has been that they're two very distinct, different groups. I shouldn't say distinct, because there's definitely some grade. But STEP is a behavioral. It's kids who need a very clear behavioral plan. Peak, it's a community. It provides for a community for kids who we have incredible trauma in BAMs. Kids, it's amazing that they wake up and come to school. Kids who don't know what community is, they're not available for learning at this point in their life, and they need someone every day being there regardless of what they throw at them. And these two folks in Peak do that, and they're committed. Their heart is right out there. I know, again, how do you equate that with money in a budget? And I'm not sure. I don't have an answer for that. But I do know these are two very different programs. Our school, yes, needs both of them, but without Peak, you're missing a segment of the population that will quietly slip away. And I have kids that say, I'm dropping out. And then they say, tell me about Peak. Could you tell me about Peak? So I just hope everybody can think long and hard about that.
Somebody asked about the timeline and so forth. It might be good just to go over that. We have an agenda tonight, and the 2019 budget action needed. We have to pass a budget tonight, or else we can't have our regular meeting because there's a window of time. So if we did not pass the budget, and if we did pass the budget, and there are a lot of individuals that think it has egregious errors in it, then those individuals can come to the annual meeting and change the budget at that time. So, yes, Bob, am I speaking out of line here?
No, you're not out of line, but I think it should be made clear that this is not the absolute drop dead date. This was our last meeting before the budget material has to be prepared for the warning, which is between 30 and 40 days before the annual meeting.
That's right.
So the drop dead date, if you will want to call it that, is the 13th, which is this Saturday. So
this coming Saturday.
It has to be in the newspaper before that, so actually it has to be to the newspaper by Thursday midday.
by Thursday. Okay. All right, so, but tonight is just to, I know there's a lot of emotion about many issues here, and I just want to, make people aware that this is not the absolute drop dead date tonight. Hopefully we would have been able to.
Well, we'd have to
review it
warn
then.
another meeting, which would be,
right.
we'd have to warn it tomorrow in order to have another meeting.
I understand that, it's a very tight time constraint, but I just wanted to, not to have the impression out there, and I know that's the way we understood it based on, it was our last meeting before we had to do that, so.
Are there any statutory provisions for getting an extension for postponing the annual meeting?
No, the action was taken last February when to set the re-vote, and that there's no provision to change that. So,
And the finance, we started the budget, we start the budget period around November, and they're all open meetings, and it might behoove some staff members to like start attending those, so you know what's going on before it's too late.
We found out today.
Right.
Seriously, we
Yeah.
got a budget online today, which was not the same budget
But
that
we've
you're
just-
talking about right now.
Well, yeah, we've discussed it, you know, that particular budget and a different budget last week and the week before. As a matter of fact, you were at one of them, right? Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Wendy Bayless. I've been a resident of Brattleboro since 2002. Many people in town know me as a teacher who's worked preschool through high school with kids as an academic support teacher, kids with 504 plans or IEPs, and also as an advocate of multiracial families. And I joined a group of people who don't look like they have children of color, but they do. So, and I'm actually here to say, respectfully disagreeing with Mr. Perrin, that Latin does have a very direct impact on student studies and their academic success. I have 3 kids who have all been honors graduates of BUHS. And as my son said when he heard about this, Mom, don't you know they only let you into college if you know how to read the motto in Latin that the college has on their seal? When they were still in high school, 2 of my students took all 3 of Miss Leibach's classes. They said the vocabulary helped them in science, in English, in history, in their law class, their economics classes. It helped them with their standardized testing, although many of us teachers are not fans of standardized testing. It's important for the school to have students who do well in them, and they did. My kids would be happy to show you their SAT scores if you're interested in that. And the other area I disagree respectfully with is Latin is the basis of so many languages. As we look at our neighbors to the south and all of Latin America, 2 of my kids traveled there and they said their Latin was invaluable. When their Spanish failed them, they could still read the cognates. I know some people tend to think of Latin as a dead language. There are jokes about that, or they think it's only spoken in the Vatican at this point in time. My family is not Catholic. We're in a different religious group, many of you know. But the roots of our language are in Latin and in Greece. And even though other parts of the world have been very important, no matter where you come from, it's something to help you succeed in school. So I wanted to state that. And I have one, so saying that we don't start Latin in elementary school or middle school, why should we have it here? If we used that same system for physics or advanced biology, it just doesn't seem to be logical. So my very last point is, I haven't heard anything spoken tonight about cutting sports programs. And BUHS is a school and a community. So our teachers and our support staff and the awareness of what our multicultural community is like are really important. I looked at the BUHS website when I was preparing to come tonight at the list of sports. And I know for some kids, that's their entree into the world. But we haven't talked about how there are resources in the community to take sports in other places where the resources that the school can provide are not available in the same way. So thank you.
Michaela speak before other people at this point?
Sure. Thank you for being rude. Appreciate it. Thank you. Go ahead.
I just know one of the things that I've done in my role, I've been here 8 years as diversity coordinator. One of the things that's not mentioned is that I'm a mentor for students, all students. And over the years, a lot of the students that I spend a lot of time with have been through PEAK program. And I think that it's been instrumental in their development. And so what I've seen is that they've gotten a lot of support, and in the high school, they find ways to find that support. So a lot of those students I spend time with, Robin Macy spends time with, and other people in the school. And I don't know, since the shifting of the special ed program in the whole district, I'm not aware of how the STEP program works in the high school exactly. But I know that those students often use me as a touch tone over the last few years and have talked about how influential it has been for their lives. So I don't think that this is just about my job or Liz's job, who has been a supporter of diversity all the years that I've been here, is about are just about bread and butter, but it's about that once these educational programs get cut, they don't come back. And our students are in need, and so what happens is the pendulum swings really far one way, and then it comes right back, and thus they're saying, look, why do we have this fire? And this is why right now, because we're making these cuts in places where students, there really is a need, and there'll be a continued need, and how we address it will morph, and then we'll come right back and say, why isn't there a person who does this thing? And we'll forget, because history does repeat itself if we don't pay attention, that we had someone, we had Peak, we had these things that really were in place to support students.
Hi, my name is Elise Landis. I live in Brattleboro. I went to BUHS. I provide personal care and respite for kids with autism or on the autism spectrum. I also am part-time at a daycare, and I work per diem for the child care program, child care, the Welcoming Place for the Hub program. So I work with people, and the kids that I've worked with in providing personal care and respite have had a lot of trouble with the public education system, did not serve their needs, and there's a lot of behavioral stuff. And so I witness a lot of, and at the daycare there, we have children who have a lot of behavioral challenges, and a lot coming from trauma and PTSD and a lot of different things. But what I have to say is, what I witness, the most effective, what am I trying to say? The kids with the most behavioral problems or challenges, I witness it get triggered and escalate to extremes when they are feeling judged or they're feeling separate, they're not feeling supported. And I feel like investing in behavioral technicians to come in and fix something in these children, send that message of, that there's something to fix, there's something wrong with them, and then removing diversity sends this message that diversity and all-inclusiveness is not the priority, and that the children will get that, and they will treat each other as more separate, and that creates more volatile environment for these kids who are already very sensitive, and it will escalate, and they refuse to fit in any boxes you put them into, and I think that you'll have more behavioral problems across the board if you got the diversity agenda.
Thank you. Linda?
My name is Linda Rinder. I work at BAMS and BUHS. I'm a school nurse, so I see the peak students in middle school, and then I see them at the high school. And just quickly going through my head is a student who struggled immensely in middle school. She is now in 11th grade. She goes to school every day. She's doing well in her classes. I remember when she did the ski program, she used to behave like a 5-year-old, and she was skiing. She got so much out of that program. I can think of another student who's now, I believe he's in 10th grade. He did peak. He really got involved in the farm program. And Flo has people try to help fund it for the summer. This boy rode his bike every day to work at the farm over the summer. He's in 10th grade, he's playing football, he's doing well. I can think of another student who's in 9th grade. When she was in 7th grade, a very smart student, was not coming to school Then she went to the PEAK program in 8th grade, and she had that small community, did well. She's now in the high school, she's doing well. She is participating in NEYT and also the drama program at the high school. And I'm sure if I really had some time to rack my mind, I could come up with some more students that the PEAK program was a place for them to feel safe, successful, connect one-on-one with someone. And many of the students that go through PEAK, academics is not their strong point, but they get the farm program, the ski program, and that entices them to do well in school. So I just think it's a great program that, yes, it doesn't serve a whole lot of kids, but the kids it does serve, they go on to be successful in high school. So I just think, you know, I see them go through middle school and how they struggle, and then I see them, there's one student, she would come in the office and cry all the time, and now she's in 11th grade and she just waves high. So I think the PEAK program provided the stability and the strength for her to feel comfortable in school, to go on and be successful in high school. So just consider that if you can.
My name's Dawn Ravenna. I've had 3 kids go through this high school. I went through it myself, and I have to say that I wouldn't want any of your jobs. I know that you do the best that you can with what you can do. But in talking about, I thought I was going to be able to do this, but talking about the PEAK program, my son was ready to give up on school. He was failing. And I thought, and my husband thought we were failing him as parents. And he went into the PEAK program and did the ski one, went up to Mount Snow, and he has since gone to college, and he's gotten himself a degree at Vermont Tech, and he's married, and he has his own child now, and he's a functioning part of the community, which is, I didn't think we were going to get out of him. So, like I said, I can't imagine sitting when you guys sit and trying to decide what has to be cut and what needs to stay, but just if you would think, you know, if you can, if you have time. And I have to say, I can't see the man's name at the end of the seat there, but when he said we should all come to the meetings a little bit more, if anything, this has opened my eyes to realize that I need to come here even though I don't have a child in the school system anymore. I have grandchildren that are going to be coming up. And I'm going to pay better attention and support people where I can, which includes all of you people on the board. Thank you.
Sheila Linton, Brattleboro. Talk really loud because I like when people can hear people. So I'm an alum of BUHS. I've brought one of my children through BUHS, and I have a second one that's in the 10th grade. When the diversity position coordinator was founded, I was in the high school. I'm one of the original people that were part of the WARE group, which at the time was started as a minority support group, open to all youth, which was mainly attended by youth of color. And there was actually a diversity part is when we started doing those diversity days and having, I think they had some, I can't remember what it was called, but what you do, you get the day off and you get to do the whole diversity day. That started when I was in school. Many of you know my story in this room. BUHS was a horror for me. I still suffer a lot of trauma from BUHS because of the racial harassment that I endured. If it wasn't for the programs, such as the diversity program, such as having the AWARE program, I, my brother, and many of my other peers would have not survived in that school. There were 0 mentors of color. There was one person of color in the school, a wonderful guidance counselor that I didn't happen to have, and that was the only person that I saw that even remotely looked like me. I ditto what everybody around the room has said. It is very serious for youth of color and all children to see the people of color in leadership positions. It's extremely important, like Tony said, for them to be able to have somebody to go to who's actually in the schools. It's important for all of you to have that curriculum, to have those things that you're asking for so you can be better school board members, so you can be better teachers, and so you can maybe even be better parents and community members. I'm really upset because I've been having this conversation for over 20 years. And it's just like the pendulum that Michaela talked about. It just keeps on swinging back and forth, back and forth. And to go with what Robin said, we're going to sit here as a community and swing that pendulum the other way when we know what's happening in our national discourse, when we know the discussions were happening in our town, when we know that there's over 20% of youth of color coming up in the school, and we know we have an all-white board who are making these decisions. So I'm going to say, on behalf of the disability community, not about us, without us. And this is a term the disability community uses, and I support the PEAK program as well. Because right now, my child struggles in this school. And my child might not make it in this school. And it's because of the reasons that are being discussed around the table today. It is important. And when we talk about that PEAK program, my child went through that PEAK program as well. And what I hear today is that we pick the most marginalized people, like what you were saying, ma'am. Pick the most marginalized group of people to attack. That's what we just did. We just said, let's take people who are low socioeconomic status. Let's take people with disabilities, and let's take racial minorities. So for those target groups that you're trying to hit, you hit them all. So congratulations for your diversity and continuing to marginalize our communities that really need your support right now. Because that is what is happening. I'm disturbed by the fact of, like Mary said, you're not going to be able to piece people in for $15,000 a year to come in and get more white folks to do more stuff in your schools. I presume you will choose what you want as well for that $15,000. Not only will you choose the curriculum, but you will choose the people who come in to do that so you can feel comfortable and feel safe. Because we know it's hard to feel uncomfortable. It's really hard to do good work. But we've got to do that work. I want to know, we talked about all these cuts, but we're going to keep a stipend for the wear position. I want to know what that stipend looks like. What stipend? Nobody said a number when you said that stipend. I want to know why you on the end said, we didn't even have time to even look at all this, we're just rushing it through. I want to know why we found out at 3 o'clock today that somebody's position is being canceled. I want answers to these questions, and I want them before we leave. People can talk, that's fine, and ask their questions, but I actually want answers to the questions that we're asking. It's not acceptable. People don't need to come to every single meeting and be in the weeds and do all of this to be engaged in what's going on in the community. There are many people of us who have shown up here and who are engaged. And I think it's unfair that you've taken a matter that's very serious, crunched it into a small timeline, picked the most marginalized students you could, and swung the pendulum the opposite way, and chose to sit there as a school board and justify that and think that that's okay. And I say that, I really say that with as much integrity and no malice, but I really ask that you really think deeply when you're making these decisions, because not only will these decisions have an impact on your children, they'll have an impact on your children's children, and those children's children that you'll never get to see.
So I just want to be clear on some things. We've been at this for over 2 hours. And I know that that's not a long time in the grand scheme of everything else, but there are some things that we do need to do, and I know that we could be here all night. So if we can limit a couple more comments, and then we can move on and try to, I know that Sean had some things he had talked about, and we can try to answer some questions and things like that. Yeah.
I'm Brenda Siegel. I'm actually from Newfane, but I teach after-school programs, and I teach lots of students that are in this district. And I also graduated from Brattleboro Union High School. When I hear you talk about the big umbrella of how we're going to include a wider array of diversity in the umbrella, and then I hear what we're choosing to cut, it sounds to me like we're cutting the umbrella.
Yes.
So There are other programs. Sports were mentioned. I have a student whose sports is her life force. It is the reason she can get through school. So I get that sports are important, but I have not heard about cuts to sports programs at all when we talk about this. And when we're talking about cutting, again, like Sheila said, the most marginalized students, which echoes what is happening nationally, what is happening in some ways statewide, and what is happening in our community. When everything that our kids hear right now is that these people don't matter, and then our community echoes that, then what you're telling these kids directly, these kids in the PEAK program, these kids that will lose Michaela, what you are telling them directly is that they do not matter, that what they are hearing from that orange man is that that stuff is true, that their disabilities don't matter, that their marginalized doesn't matter, that their socioeconomic status doesn't matter, that they're struggling in school doesn't matter. You are choosing to tell them that they don't matter. And I understand that what you're trying to do is make a budget work, but you need to not make that budget work on the backs of our most marginalized children and then sit there and talk about a bigger umbrella. That umbrella needs to get bigger, not smaller, and this budget makes it smaller. So whatever you think you're doing, those words don't matter if there are no actions attached to your words. So I urge you to relook at this budget and find things to cut that are not echoing what we are hearing on the national stage that is causing a great disgrace to our world, not just our country and not just our state and not just our community. Please look differently so that I can continue to be proud of the community that I come from.
Over here, gentleman in the hat. My name is Jacob Wheeler, and I teach math and science in the PEAK program. I'm also I'm a white man who's the only white person in a family of 6. So I have children of color coming up in the community. So both of these issues are deeply important. I just want to echo the sentiment that our most vulnerable students are being targeted by these cuts. It's a really disheartening message. The other thing I wanted to say is that these programs are based on relationships that we're able to have with our students. So, you know, what Michaela does, what we do, it's all about community and it's all about relationships, and that can't be replaced by speakers coming in, and it can't be replaced, in my opinion, by something like the STEP program, which is going to be like really quick transitions of students coming in and out of classrooms, being seen by someone who's a behavior analyst. That to me I don't get a sense that that's relationship based, and it's relationships that I think really make a difference with people that are vulnerable.
Hi, my name's Ashley Netto. I'm from Vernon and I'm also a teacher at the high school. I'm one of the teachers of the 9th grade diversity ed program. I have been for the past 5 years. Michaela's really important, and having a diversity coordinator I think is really important to the program, especially when I was a new teacher. I just read the Vermont Human Rights Commission and the Attorney General's report on racial disparities for students of color in our schools. Some of the things that they identified as being problems in Vermont were things like cultural barriers for students of color, things like outreach and support for families of color, things like the lack of culturally responsive curriculum in the classroom. And that's all stuff that our diversity coordinator does, and I've seen Michaela do. She's been a valuable resource since I've been here for my own classroom on issues of race, but also on issues of class. It's really helped me with how to teach that. And a lot of the things that she does, I don't do in my 9th grade classroom and won't do in my 9th grade classroom. Like being a mentor to students of color. I'm not going to do that as a young white lady. I'm just not. And also just that outreach and that planning, that reaching out to families of color for school events. It's so important, and Michaela does that through AWARE. The diversity program wouldn't be the same without that position. It wouldn't be the same without Michaela. I don't think that can be replaced by an expert like coming in once in a while. Michaela's there if there's something in particular that I'm struggling with in class. If any teacher needs to bring something into their classroom, she's there in the district and knows our community, and that's so important. Being a teacher of a lot of ninth graders, I can also speak to the PEAK program because I see them after they come out of PEAK into high school. A lot of students in PEAK went through my classroom. And I would agree with Bill that they need something different sometimes. They need something different than the standard curriculum that's offered. An incredible resource that we have at the high school is the information that comes from the teachers of PEAK, from volunteers about these students. Their dreams, their wishes, who they are, what works for them. That information and the teachers knowing that, I think, helps them to have a chance to be successful in the high school. And as a teacher of these students, I would really hate not to have that. That's all.
Hi, I'm Marisa Nielsen. I live in Brattleboro and I teach at Vernon, as many of you know. I also did the SPARK program, the Teaching for Social Justice K-12 Master's program. And I have been in this district for 5 years, and I lean on Michaela very often. But I think what's my particular point right now is that as educators and as administrators in this district, I don't think, to my knowledge, there hasn't been a time where we've done professional education in terms of diversity where it has not come from Michaela. So Michaela might introduce some article to read to the administrators who then bring it to their own schools. So the principals will bring it to the schools, and then the teachers and the staff at that school will have a conversation on that. It all stems from that position, that diversity coordinator position. And I think a lot of people have said this tonight, it takes continuous work. I remember in a diversity equity meeting talking about the implicit bias article, the one article that we talked about last year, pretty much district-wide. It's a really uncomfortable thing to talk about, and I know that at my school, many staff were questioning and feeling frustrated and uncomfortable, and that discomfort from a majority of white staff pushes back against people like Michaela and pushes back against the students of color that we have in our classroom. So if we're not continually pushing ourselves to analyze the way we think about the world, we'll fall back into that zone where we're replicating things that we don't want to replicate. And again, I would just say that to my knowledge in my 5 years here, everything that has come down in terms of diversity and professional development has come from that position. So, thank you.
One last comment, okay.
I'm Liz Liebach, the Latin teacher. While I totally agree with all the comments I've made about diversity, and I did get a chance to talk to some of you on Thursday about Latin and its appeal to a segment of our population that doesn't take, maybe it doesn't fit into a conventional mode. And that the numbers in Latin, while what Steve said sound possibly low, the position, they're really not. There's over 30 kids in Latin 1 that need a place to go next year, and if they find out there isn't Latin 1 next year, it just doesn't give them, it just doesn't really allow the program to continue in the way it has for my 18 years here and the decades before that, many decades. To segue on Ashley's comments about kids and how they need a special place in the school, Latin's been kind of the place for the offbeat kid, the kid that's been a gamer, been into mythology, been in history, into coding, into things that you don't find in the modern language class, where maybe they're not wanting to learn to speak, they're just wanting to learn about language and about English and about our culture and our world culture. So I know it's been a really long night, so anyway, I'd like you to think about it again after I ask you to think about it on Thursday. Thanks.
Yeah, if I could follow up on my earlier comments, and Sheila, you found out at
Come right here.
There you go. If at 3,
Actually, I lied about that. I actually found out at 5.
oh, that's when I found out too. So, and I hadn't heard anything about peak or Latin or anything else. So, actually, let me say at the outset, because outing myself as an economist, I think you maybe made assumptions of where I was coming from. My belief coming here when I just heard about the diversity opinion, and I had no idea why that happened. That was the first time that I heard. Was that if it was just due to a budget cut, I had no intention of voting in favor of that budget cut. But I wanted to hear what the reasons were. I had no idea at all what the reasons were. And the budget committee has been working on it, and the staff has been working on it. And I think one thing that occurs that you said is we're all, I think, really good and well-intentioned, but it's that unconscious bias that maybe is what's showing itself here. So when I was talking about, dollars and what the value is for that, I wasn't looking at we've got to stick to 4%, 4.3, whatever. It's just that, to me, it struck me as two other options. And some of these comments have come up, and I'm really sorry that Diane, I forget her name, who just left. One is, if we have to stick with a dollar number, is there another program, another something that we can cut that's less valuable, that would add up to $78,000 and preserve those? My hunch is yeah. I mean, and listening to you all speak, we heard the value of those things. I haven't heard anybody want to speak to the value of biology or English composition. I mean, I teach college, so those things are important, but it's clear that these things are really important. And so that's one thing that is really helpful to hear, and it supports my belief in again not voting for a budget that doesn't have it. Now, one, we could cut other things, or we could just add the money back in. And I don't know the degree to which a board picks and chooses, because I know at town meetings, and there will be a meeting on February 13th, whenever it is, that there can be amendments, and those are just dollar values. Can we, as a board, specifically direct budget items that best budget? Okay, so that I would not support something that didn't have. I'm not sure about Latin yet, but peak, because over my years, and I was on the town board with Sheila, and Sheila, it was, I think you are the only person of color that's been on a board that I've been on. And incredibly valuable. We didn't always agree on everything, but it's incredibly valuable to hear these things and to sort of, not literally, but figuratively slap me in the face, go, oh, whoa, did I just do something? And that's really helpful. And that's what diversity is about, and that's what education is about in a broader sense. So I think these things are incredibly important. So one, then in speaking to the board that's going to need to vote on these things, is that, the budget committee and the staff has worked incredibly well in terms of really short time periods of what to do. So I'm not trying to impugn anything there. But one thing in terms of that value for the dollar is also looking at irreparable harm. Even if we chose just to add these things back and the budget went up and we had 7-12 cents, whatever it is, there's real pain. And you come to the meetings, and by the way, these meetings that we come to, it's usually like 1% of the population that show up. So please come to that meeting on February, whatever date it is, because, and those meetings, both when I was a chair of the town school board and since I've been on the high school board, have been very supportive of education and of budgets. But there will be people, and rightfully so, that are concerned about the expense because taxes are high. So that is something, even though it's hard to quantify these things, there is a tax implication. But one thing that drives me to be really clear and firm on this is, well, if we made a mistake, not in terms of keeping these two programs that I'm advocating for, but if we make a mistake by adding X number of cents to the tax bill, That's a harm. I mean, that would be a harm, and people would have to pay that. We'll all have to pay that. But is it the same level of harm, of irreparable harm, as discontinuing these programs? Because I have seen through my years, being on the EES board and being on the town board and being on the high school board, of how unbelievably valuable these sorts of programs are for keeping kids. And in sports is one of those things that keeps people in as well. Whether we're spending too much in sports is another issue. But that is something that there are different things for different people that keep kids here and open their eyes for those things. But to cut these programs, you know, it's not really our fault that we're rushed, because we have to operate under constraints. But if we're going to make a mistake, I'd rather make a mistake in terms of having a slightly higher tax bill than cutting programs that I think are really, really vital. And I could go on, but I'll stop.
Okay, so we have, we can,
Mr. Chairman.
yes,
We need to have a short recess.
okay. All right, so why don't we go ahead and have a, let's say, 12-minute biology break, and that'll bring us to 9 o'clock.
Ricky, can you just tell us, is your decision an executive session?
No.
So it's open?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're in recess. I'm calling us back to order at 9:01. So our 12-minute break is only 13 minutes. That's pretty impressive. Okay. All right. So I'm going to call us back to order, and I've talked to a couple of my colleagues during our break, and normally the chair doesn't make a motion, but I'm going to make a motion, and I'm going to move that we table the remainder of the budget discussion and ask the administration to go back and look at those numbers again and see if there's a way, based on the community conversation that's happened this evening, to do things differently.
I'll second that.
All right, moved and seconded. Is there a discussion from the board related to that?
So does that mean that we'll meet?
We'll have to have another meeting, and I just conferred with Lyle related to when that meeting would have to happen so that we can warn it in the appropriate amount of time for our annual meeting on February 13th, which, just so that people know from the community that's here, that is stationed when it is, so that our budget numbers can be passed and all the stuff that we have to do can be passed, so that it can then go to the 5 towns in the appropriate amount of time. So it's all about statute and the number of days that you need in between one decision to another decision to another decision. I know in past years at our annual meeting, people have come forward and said, why do you have this in the middle of February? And it's because we need to make decisions on our budgets so that the town schools and the towns themselves can make decisions on their budgets based on our budget. So it's a domino effect. So based on that, we would need to meet Wednesday of this week.
In 2 days.
In 2 days. So that the warning can go out for the annual meeting on Thursday morning, and that way we're within all of our statuted guidelines.
Isn't that too short a time to warn a Wednesday meeting?
You can warn a meeting within 24 hours if it's considered emergency, and I would say that this qualifies.
So, and what we'll do is if my motion passes, Lyle will have Barb warn whatever time we decide on Wednesday, for the first thing tomorrow morning, which will actually be greater than 24 hours, most likely. So yes, Sean.
Well, would the finance committee meet prior to that?
If the finance committee wanted to meet, I would say they probably could, but I would say that given the time constraint, it may end up just being as many of us board members that can get together to have action on the budget by the end of the day on Wednesday.
Did you know if you're talking afternoon, evening? No idea yet. Okay.
That's a discussion that we all need to have right now.
I'm fully open Wednesday.
All right. Anybody on the board members have an issue with Wednesday, let's say 5 o'clock on Wednesday? Administration, does that feel like okay? Administrators, Frank, you good? All right.
Is it, I'm the only one probably, but that's probably the absolute only really bad time.
Okay.
Between 5 and 5:30. You don't want to hear it.
Want to go 5:30?
If
5:30
we could go
help you?
5:30, that would be helpful. I might be a couple minutes late, but.
Okay. All right. I personally have, I for work have a 7 o'clock meeting that night, so I'm just trying to figure out how to do this before that.
I have a 7 o'clock meeting that night too.
You have a 7 o'clock meeting that night too, okay.
Earlier would be better for me.
And Guilford has a special board meeting at 6:30 where we're gonna be losing some administrators.
So Woody, is earlier
Oh,
better?
If we do it earlier in the afternoon, is that better for you?
Yes, it would be. So I could be back by 4 o'clock or so. Yeah, I can make arrangements.
So afternoon, early in the afternoon work for folks? Can they make that work?
2 o'clock?
2 o'clock? Does 2 o'clock work for everybody on the board? Administration, does that work for everybody? 2 o'clock? All right.
2 o'clock on Wednesday?
2 o'clock on Wednesday, does that work for folks?
Sure. Probably.
Okay. So I apologize for that.
Yes.
It's a little weird, but okay. All right, so we're gonna meet at 2 o'clock on Wednesday. Can somebody here find us a room?
Yeah, it'll either be here or the multi-purpose room.
Okay, just send out an email Wednesday morning, let us know where. Does that work?
We want to do that tomorrow so we can be warned.
That sounds good.
Why don't we tentatively say the multi-purpose room, because I know I can get that.
Okay.
I can use eminent domain.
All right, so 2 o'clock, Wednesday the 10th, in the multipurpose room. Yes, Sean?
I was wondering if prior to that meeting, whether it would be possible to Frank to give us some guidelines in terms of going over the cap, financial implications of going over the cap, and, you know, what's realistic in terms of, you know, what we're doing.
Ricky, can you, maybe there's more discussion, but I'm not quite sure what the directive is. Are you are you asking us to stay at the same number? Are you is the board gonna give us numbers to go on? What are you actually, you mentioned something about revisiting, but I guess we'll look for a little more guidance on what you want us to do.
Yeah, I think that based on the conversation I had with some of my colleagues during our break and from hearing the community is there a way to maintain the integrity of some things?
What are some things?
Well, I mean, I think the things like, for instance, Latin, for instance, is still in the budget for next year. So that's not a budget implication specifically. But there are some things that were cuts from the budget to have the administration and Frank look at ways to maintain those cuts and if there's a way to make up the offset someplace else financially. There might not be a way, but there might be a way.
If I could, I mean, maybe early in budget processes, we often say give a constant service and a constant budget. So maybe come up with two possibilities. One is holding it at the dollar number here. And I mean, if you want my vote, you know what it'll take. But there are 8 others. So, or that, by adding those 2 programs back and maybe cutting back other things, what's the best you can do? And the question of keeping it under the cap is really important because the penalties come into play. And Sean, I'm not sure that we can have any, unless it's just you and Frank, there's open meeting that even if it's a budget meeting, that's an open meeting that has to be warned and those sorts of things. So,
yeah.
I'd love to hear that, particularly since I was late today. But that would be helpful to hear.
At this point, I think it's appropriate to have the whole board.
Whole board be part of it.
I would agree with that.
Okay. All right. Does that clarify for you folks, for Keith and Stephen, Drew? Okay. So So we have a motion on the table, so let's deal with our motion on the table if we could. So all those in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstentions? None? Okay. So the things that are on our agenda that are related to the budget, we're tabling or putting off on Wednesday to our special meeting related to the budget on Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the high school multipurpose room. Okay? All right. So I'm going to move on to other parts of our budget. Folks that are here, that I know most of you here related to the budget stuff, I encourage you to stay because as I said in the beginning, we don't normally have an audience. So please stay. That'd be great. But we're going to move on to clerk's report and approval of the minutes from December 18th. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved to the minutes of 18. Moved and seconded. Is there any additions, deletions, corrections to those minutes?
Oh, yeah, I just, let me just pull it up.
Is that a correction down there?
I do. I mean, it pales in terms of what we talked about. One was, I don't know if Franz is still here, it almost looks like he works for BCTV, but from the Brattleboro Town Finance Committee, I'd stick in there. And then also in terms of the my report on the SU Finance, we did discuss the Finance Executive Committee's roles and responsibilities as well as just talking about it. And we were talking about having a discussion tonight more about it, but I think we've got time to do that later.
Okay. All right. Anything else related to the minutes from our last meeting? Yes.
Under BUHS, Natalia's last name is Forkin, F-O-R-K-I-N. She came children.
All right. Anything else? All right. So is there a motion? I mean, we have a motion on the table to approve the minutes and seconded with those two corrections. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? Okay. Is there any other communications to come for the board? None? Okay. Normally we recognize groups and individual visitors. We've done a lot of that already. I just want to, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't say to the folks that are here, is there other reason that you're here unrelated to the budget related stuff that we've already discussed that you wanted to talk to the board about? No? Okay. So I'm doing that. And in awareness of our time this evening, I would like to get the sense of the board in relation to us tabling consent agenda to the next meeting. Is there a motion for that?
I second that.
Okay, all right.
I move that.
Move that, is there a second? And seconded by Ian, all in favor? Aye. All right. So we'll table consent agenda until next meeting.
Next regular meeting?
Next regular meeting, sorry, the next regular meeting, yes.
Okay.
Not, we won't do that on Wednesday, the next regular meeting. And we won't do that on the 13th. Administrative reports why don't we limit this to, is there anything specific that you think that the board needs to know right now?
Got about 20 minutes to talk.
Nope, anything? Okay. Yep. And we do have an executive session matter, which we will go into afterwards. So there's nothing really for administrative reports right now, so we're gonna move beyond that. Unfinished business, we've dealt with it, FY19. Act 46 discussion is listed under unfinished business. And I guess my question, and then that's to maybe some of the folks that have been involved in the alternative structures, and maybe Lyle, if she knows, did something get to the State Board of Education by the 26th?
Yes, from all boards.
From all boards, okay. So it's now in their hands to do something. All right. Anybody else have any other questions related to Act 46? All right, so moving on to new business. The first thing under new business is the warning articles for our meeting on the 13th. And there's two pieces to this. Many of you that have been on the board before, and I think some of you have seen it, It's
You included
this, oh, it's included with the financial stuff, this
Yes.
page. So we
The
need to
last
make,
page.
okay, so we need to make some decisions about who's gonna say what articles, but also there's a master copy that we're all gonna need to sign before we leave tonight. So since we're all here, nobody leave until this is signed.
We're gonna change, I assume we may change.
We're gonna change that number, but,
Yeah, so we might wanna wait till Wednesday.
okay, that's probably a good idea. But we can make the decisions about who's gonna read what articles on February 13th.
I'll do 7.
All right, Ruth's got 7.
I got 2, the moderator, I think.
All right, Mike's got 2.
So you do notice that it's only through June 30.
It's only what?
Only, the moderator is only through June 30. And we will need to find a new moderator that takes
Right,
over
because
July 1.
The Vernon's
Yeah.
leaving. But that doesn't have anything to do with me announcing,
Nope.
moving the motion.
Nope.
You just have to do it twice.
All right, anybody else?
To do it twice.
I can do it.
Yeah, you wanna do, so you wanna do 2 and 3?
Sure.
All right, we got Mike down there twice. Anybody else?
I'll take 6.
All right, Ian is on 6.
I'll take 5.
Russ has got 5.
I'll take 4.
All right, Sean's on 4.
Bob gets 8.
Bob gets 8. Sorry,
I was
Bob.
gonna say, I better speak up fast or I'm gonna be one of my usual.
I'll go ahead and take 1. So you just have number 9.
I'll do 9.
Okay, Kate's got 9. All right, excellent. And then on Wednesday, once we have the actual numbers for Article 8, we'll do the signing of the warning article at that point on Wednesday. Excellent. All right. So that is all of our regular business and our budget discussion to come before the board tonight. So is there a motion to enter consent agenda? Sorry.
One little thing, because this Thursday, I mean, things are coming pretty fast, but there are 6 members of this board who are going to be up in 2018.
Yep.
And so I just started the process, and I think some other people have getting a petition together from the town of Guilford. But it's a lot of members of the board, so if people want to run again, or if they have ideas of people, different people, they're really doing, they're doing the Saturday, but like I have to get mine in on Thursday, because my town clerk's not open on Friday, so.
Right. Yeah, everyone that's up for re-election knows that their seat, their position is up for re-election.
At
Yes.
list, Ruth, you've decided not to.
I am not a candidate.
And there is someone from Dummerston who
We
might
do
this.
have one from Dummerston.
Sean,
Yep.
Annie, and Mike, you need to run until June 30th. Or someone from.
Someone from Vernon.
I know.
You need to run to it.
And then in Brattleboro, it's,
Ricky and Katie.
that's it? Okay, and I know that Katie and I were talking the other night, and she's taken on papers. I went to the town clerk today, but apparently Brattleboro's, the town clerk is the only person that can give you the things, and I went during lunch. So I have to go tomorrow. So anyway, all right, but yes, so there will be some election stuff this year. So is there a motion to go into executive session for a personnel matter?
So moved.
A second, moved and seconded, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
So we'll go into executive session in the other room. I'm gonna ask board members to please.